Why is it that when we're alone, we're just about completely fluent? In fact, some people are completely fluent when they're alone. They're completely relaxed when they're alone. Why is that? My name is Michael Williams, and we're going to talk about that today. One of the reasons is that we're in what we call our resting state. We're just completely relaxed. We're not worried about being judged. We're not worried about making mistakes. We're not preoccupied with all those things. We're in a resting state. So the question becomes, how can we get back to and stay in this resting state? So I posed this question to our community and got some wonderful answers, and I'll be posting those answers in or around this video. But today we're going to look at four challenges that pull us out of this resting state. And then in another video, we'll talk about solutions. So I want to give you a quick overview of these challenges now. Number one is pressure. So there's internal and external pressures, and we'll discuss and talk about what those are. And the second challenge is preoccupation, mental preoccupations. What does that mean? What are these preoccupations? And then the third one is what we call procedural memory. This is our speech history. And then the fourth and final one is what we call performance disruptions. It's when our brain or different parts of our brain actually can cause our speech, our flow, to be disrupted. So we'll talk about those areas of our brain in just a minute or two. So let's talk about pressure, internal and external. So when we talk about internal pressure, we're talking about things like the fear of judgment, And that means you and I become, or we feel a sense of pressure when we feel like, or we think, or we believe that the people around us are judging us or will judge us, especially if we make a mistake, if we speak too fast, if we stutter, if we do whatever. So it's that fear of being judged. And this is especially acute when the people there are in a position of authority, or when they have some kind of influence over your life or over your income, okay? So this internal pressures can be a fear of judgment, can be perfectionism, it can be overly self-monitoring oneself, right? When you're just overly monitoring what you're doing and how you're doing it, how you're looking, how you're standing, how you're speaking, you're just overly monitoring yourself. So let's talk about external pressures. These are things like time constraints. So when you feel like you're rushed, or when you actually are being rushed, so let's just say you have 5 minutes to do something, or you had 10 minutes to give a presentation, now it's been cut down to 5. Or when you're in the drive-thru, or when you're standing in a line, and you feel like, I have to hurry up and get this order out, or I have to hurry up and say this. So you have these, these time constraints. So you are being rushed, or you feel like you're being rushed. Another external pressure is in high stakes situations or high stakes conversations. When there's an interview, or when there's a big presentation, everyone's there and they're expecting you to do well. Or even when you're in a social situation, but let's just say it's around your colleagues or your boss or your superiors, and you know that you need to impress them in one way or another. So this would be what we call an external pressure. Now, let's talk about the second challenge, which is preoccupation or mental preoccupation. So there's something that we call negative anticipation, right? What is negative anticipation? Negative anticipation is when you and I think, or we say something like, what if I block? Now I want to go a little deeper, because I want to distinguish between anxiousness or anxiety, worry, and negative anticipation. So anxiousness is more general, but it's also our body's response, both mental and physical, to a situation that we perceive to be stressful. It's our body's response to this. So anxiousness is a little more generic, and it's our body's physical, emotional response to a perceived stressor. Worry is a little more specific. It's when you have something coming up and you start to worry about it, right? You start to think about the worst possible outcome that could happen, For example, you have a meeting coming up and you start to worry about introducing yourself or messing up or not saying the right thing, so you're worried. Negative anticipation is closely related to worry, but we can differentiate it like this. When you negatively anticipate, it's a pattern. You are worried, yes, about something very specific, and you're saying, but what if I block? What if I get stuck on this word, on introducing myself, on introducing myself in terms of where I went to school or my job title? So it's something very, very specific. You start to negatively anticipate the possibility of messing up or getting stuck on specific words or reading aloud, or anything like that. And it's a pattern. It's something that happens. It just kind of clicks in, it triggers automatically. So what's another mental preoccupation? Rumination. You say, well, what's rumination, Michael? Rumination is when you look back and you keep replaying past failures over and over. You're just going back, you beat yourself up, and it makes you feel bad. And what you're essentially doing is you are visualizing and emotionalizing past failures. So you're taking something that happened in the past and you're pulling it into your present, which also means you're pushing it into your future, right? So something that happened in the past, you're replaying it, you're pulling it into your present, and you're kind of carrying it along into your future. Now, what's another mental preoccupation? Another one is when you're overly focused on outcomes, right? Instead of being present and being connected. So an example of this might be if you're giving a presentation or you're on a Zoom call, whatever, and you're more focused on, for example, speaking well, being impressive, saying the right thing, not messing up even, right? Looking good, sounding good, as opposed to being present in that moment and thinking about something like Vic or Rick. Like, how can I give value? How can I be relevant? How can I hold their attention? How can I be clear? These are all positive, constructive things, right? But when we're focused on, I just need to perform well, I need to make sure I don't look or sound stupid, I want to make sure that I sound intelligent, then we become more focused on outcomes, or I want to make sure that this presentation is the best it's ever been. It's got to be great. When we think about those things, we actually put a lot of undue, unnecessary pressure on ourselves. So the two challenges that we've talked about so far, one is pressure, both internal and external, right? And some of you can identify, I think all of us can identify with these things. The second one is preoccupation, right? Mental preoccupation, when we start to negatively anticipate, or we worry, or we ruminate, or we become too focused on the outcome rather than being present and connecting with that person or the audience. In the third part of this particular session, the third challenge, we'll talk about what we call procedural memory. Procedural memory. So, what is procedural memory? Procedural memory is what you and I do automatically. This is essentially basically stored in our basal ganglia, right? It's a group of nerves that work together to automate things so that we don't have to consciously think about everything. So our procedural memory when it comes to speech is what we might call our speech history. It's how we've performed in different contexts and different speaking situations. So you and I can perform differently depending on the context. Some people can introduce themselves very well on the phone, but in person, they struggle. Some people can speak well in front of 3, 4, or 5 people, but if it's 20 or 25 people, they struggle. Some people can speak well when it's colleagues, people that they know, but not speak very well when there's people in authority there. So these are all baked in, right? They're all baked in. They are embedded in, they're encoded into your procedural memory. It happens automatically. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to try to do it. It's in your procedural memory. So your past blocks and stutters are stored in your basal ganglia. It's also your emotional memory, like how did it feel when I stuttered, when I blocked, when I got stuck? Was it embarrassing? Did I feel less than? Did it lower my self-esteem, my self-worth, my self-confidence as a result of that? So all of that is a part of our procedural memory, which is seated primarily in our basal ganglia. This is automate stuff, right? And this is why it's so challenging to change how we speak, because as soon as we hear there's a meeting coming up or I have an interview coming up, immediately we start to do certain things. We start to negatively anticipate. Or when we're actually in the interview, we automatically begin to do and feel certain things. So now we're going to talk about this last challenge, which is what we call performance disruptions. Performance disruptions. So there are 4 major parts of our brain that are relevant to what we're discussing today in terms of performance disruptions, or even we could say performance disruptors, right? These are brain-based disruptions, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk about the amygdala. Many of you have heard of the amygdala. This is our fear system, and it's not a bad system. It's a good system because it protects us. But sometimes we become afraid of things that are really not a threat. They're not really a threat to us, but our amygdala kicks in because of our previous experiences or because of how we perceive that experience or how we perceive it's going to be. So our amygdala kicks in and it triggers tension, fight, or flight. Our amygdala, fear system. Number 1, performance disruptor or brain-based disruptions. Number 2, the prefrontal cortex. This is our thinking brain. And this is when we overthink or self-monitor, right? So when we think about something too much and we say, wait a minute, I want to make sure that I'm speaking just 100% smoothly here. I want to make sure that I don't block, that I don't get stuck. I want to make sure that I sound very intelligent and very smooth. So when we start overthinking, especially the mechanics, when we start overthinking about that in a negative way, it can disrupt our performance. It's almost like running up the stairs and trying to think about the mechanics of how your legs and your body is working, or skipping a step up the stairs, right? If you really try to think about what your legs and your ankles and your thighs and your body's doing when you're skipping the stairs, you're literally going to disrupt your performance and trip and fall and bust your face. So what do we have to do? Well, we'll talk about that in the next video. But when you overthink things, you can disrupt your performance. Now, what's the last one? The last one is our timing system, our cerebellum. Cerebellum is our timing system. And this is when we can disrupt our rhythm and flow, right? Or when our rhythm and flow of speaking is disrupted because our cerebellum works well with our prefrontal cortex and our basal ganglia. And so if our amygdala says, uh-oh, we're going to have problems, and we start overthinking it, and then our basal ganglia, which has the memory, the procedural memory, that kicks in, then all of a sudden, our timing and our rhythm and flow is disrupted, right? And this can become disrupted, especially because of our procedural memory. What we've been doing in the past is going to disrupt what we're doing right now and in the future. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is learn how to calm the amygdala, right? How to keep our prefrontal cortex focused on things that will help us speak well, right? That will help us speak smoothly, remain calmly, speak clearly, project confidence. We're going to have to reprogram our basal ganglia so that it automatically helps us and allows us to speak smoothly. And we want to allow our cerebellum to put us in a place where we're speaking with good rhythm and timing, right? And we're able to say what we want to say, when we want to say it, where we want to say it. Right? So we want all these things working together to help us to speak the way that we want to speak. And that is what we'll get into in our next video. So in summary, we talked about 4 challenges, and we tried to have them all kind of start with the P. So one is pressure, internal and external. The second one is preoccupation or mental preoccupation. The third one is our procedural memory. This is what happens automatically. And then the fourth one are those performance disruptions or disruptors. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. My name is Michael Williams.